UTSA football post-game wrap-up. I'm JJ Perez. That's Greg Luca, San Antonio Express News. Say hey, Greg. We are here to wrap up.
How you doing? We're on the same screen?
Yes. We're here to wrap up UTSA's 27-20 loss to BYU this afternoon in Provo, Utah. We're in San Antonio doing this by Zoom, obviously. Greg, the Roadrunners, another close, tough, heartbreaking loss this week against a highly ranked team versus last week against one of the conference powerhouses. What were some of your biggest takeaways?
Yeah, I was really surprised at the way the game played out. I think I was giving you a hard time on Twitter in the first quarter or two for, talking about like tension moments and thinking the game would be close and all that, because BYU moved the ball so easily on their first couple of drives that I felt like at some point they were just going to pull away. And then for whatever reason, it never happened. UTSA came up with enough plays, and, I can nitpick a lot of the defensive stuff. I mean, they gave up 470 yards and they forced 4 punts. I was telling you, like, one of them was a drop pass. One of them was when they fumbled the exchange, and one of them was after a holding penalty. And so maybe BYU was closer to connecting on some scoring drives that could have made this game a lot more lopsided. But I don't want to shortchange what UTSA did to play a team this strong, this close, on the road too, with the quarterback going down and everything else that was working against them. There's no other way to look at it than a really great outcome.
Yeah, I think UTSA, they fought hard most of the day, and they really hung tough. I thought BYU was a little bit sloppy at times, like you mentioned, but UTSA was just right there all day, and it just felt like the game may have been able to get out of hand. But we saw Lowell Narcisse come in at quarterback for Frank Harris in the second quarter, late in the second quarter, and he was able to make it happen. He was sharp. He threw some terrific passes in the second half, and probably his best game as a Roadrunner.
Yeah, for sure. I think it was his best game. He completed 85% of his passes, 17 of 20, I think it was. And for him to do that for being barely a 50% passer last year, and then last week we saw him go 2 of 5, it wasn't even a passing offense last week. He came in and it looked like just kind of a slightly expanded version of the low zone, which is the short yardage and goal line package. So for him to go from that to where we saw this week, where he was like a completely fully operational quarterback in the normal offense and was able to spread the ball around and make some really accurate passes down the field. I think like one of the big touchdowns to Franklin was kind of just throwing it up on a offsides call, but it was a really good throw still. He found Cephas down the sideline on one that I can recall off the top of my head, and it just felt like the ball was on the money a lot more than we'd ever seen from him, and honestly than we usually see from Frank Harris or any of the other quarterbacks too. It was an incredible game from him, and to barely run at all. I don't know if he had like 15 rushing yards or something like that. Like, it wasn't a big part of the game for him today. And I think we don't really know what goes on in practice, but if they really were splitting the first team reps this week with him and Frank in anticipation that this could happen, I think we saw the benefit of that in that he was more confident and comfortable running these kind of plays that he hadn't run before, or that, he hadn't run well before even last year.
It seemed like the mood among the guys that we talked to in post game, they were more disappointed, I felt like, than last week, because I think they really think they let one slip away today.
Yeah, I don't know. Did you feel that way? I was surprised that was the attitude. I mean, I guess you go into every game expecting to win, and that's what they told us through the week. But I didn't feel like there were like costly penalties or critical errors or, whatever they were pointing to or thinking of when they said that. I couldn't recall it. Do you know what they were referring to? Like, did you feel like they let it slip away in any sense?
No, I didn't. But I felt like they let it slip away, which is kind of, I guess, the reflection of where they feel they're at, because nobody gave them a chance again this week. And I mean, they were more than in this game, which was somewhat shocking.
Yeah, like I said, I really thought BYU, especially offensively, was going to be able to run up the score. And then UTSA's offense, I mean, we have to talk about whether UTSA is just a team that plays up or down to the level of competition, because we didn't think they would necessarily hang with UAB the way they did. Well, I guess you thought that, but most people didn't think they would hang with UAB the way they did. And then crazy that one, it was right down to the wire. They could have lost if the guy kicks an extra point. Stephen F. Austin was close for way too long, and Middle Tennessee, who's also not supposed to be a very good team. That game was within one score most of the way right down to the end too. So I really don't know what to make of it in that sense, because it's like this result doesn't really match up with what else they've done through the season. But how do you sort of evaluate that, given that the results are kind of uneven?
I mean, I think the opponents have just been a lot tougher than we thought in the beginning of the season, and these last two games have been really interesting because I don't know if maybe UAB is going to be as good as they've been in the past, but obviously BYU's pretty good this season, so I think there's a little bit of that, playing up and down to the opponent and trying to kind of figure out their identity offensively. I think defensively, if we want to jump to the defense, I think they're starting to get better, as the weeks go on. But how does the offense kind of support that and help them? I think that's going to determine how good this football team is going to be.
Yeah, it's an interesting point that maybe as the opponents are getting tougher, UTSA is getting better, just because, like Coach Traylor said last week, that they looked at the first 4 week kind of like training camp in a sense. And so now you're out of training camp and you're ready to go. And then what bigger test to sort of start your season, if you want to, than a ranked team like this. So if they're sort of showing that programming, but the issue with that is that it's been such a carousel at quarterback that it's hard to be able to feel like they're building a lot of offensive continuity with skill players. But one thing I did like today, I thought their offensive line played pretty well. I mean, there were times that Lowell and Frank were under pressure, but I think it was a lot better. I'd have to watch it back, but I think it was a lot better than last week felt like, where, especially like around right tackle, they were just getting beat like every play against UAB, it felt like. And they had, most of the times I checked, it looked like Mekhi Hart was in the game. I don't know how much Josh Otis played, if at all, but it seemed like getting him back into shape and ready to go is going to be the boost that they thought it would be, because I thought he held up pretty well. And then we saw some of Brandon Rolfe at left guard, which was kind of new. And I don't like, it's just when I look at it and remember to think of it and see who's there, or when you have a good angle on it to really be able to tell. So I don't know how many snaps he played, but it feels like they're starting to figure out who the guys are there. And I feel bad because 2 weeks ago I wrote that they were starting to figure out who the guys are there. But I think we're seeing like better options keep emerging. And assuming that there's nobody else coming out of the woodwork that we didn't know about, I think that this is actually going to be the group that we'll see going forward.
Yeah, and it's such an important dynamic that all those guys work together as a unit more than any other unit on the field. So it's good to see that. I was surprised we didn't see a lot more of Sincere McCormick today. Were you?
Yeah, I guess it must have been just sort of a matchup thing. I actually didn't like, this is like a silly pet peeve of mine, but I didn't like the way the camera work for the game was, because it felt like they were really like zoomed in on the line of scrimmage, and I couldn't really tell like how BYU was playing, if they were keeping a bunch of people up in the box or if the safeties weren't that deep or whatever. But I imagine if somebody's game planning for UTSA, you're going to want to take away the running game. And so it's likely that they were just sort of geared against that. And all week they talked about the size and experience on the BYU defensive line. So it stands to reason that they would have felt like it would have been tough to find some good running lanes, and that they would have wanted to maybe not go to that as much as usual, which has the side benefit of Sincere McCormick probably being able to get a little less wear and tear than we see like he's been racking up the first few weeks. So given how well Lowell moved the ball, I don't feel like it was necessarily missing. There was that one time on a 3rd and 2 that they ran that play action play, and they could have given the ball to Sincere there, but I didn't feel like there were a lot of these like short yardage situations outside of that, or times when it was like, why doesn't Sincere get the ball more? I thought within the flow of the offense, his workload made sense.
How do we feel about just the overall pace and, I guess, just production of the offense? And in the post game, Jeff Traylor said they feel like they have to score 30 points a game to help win the game. And I just don't know if this offense is there at this point in the season.
Yeah, it's a lot dependent on the opponent and on UTSA's style of offense. Like with Lowell, I think you're going to see a lot more long drives. Again, we talked about how today he didn't lean on the running game as much, but there was 1 or 2 possessions early on where they were still trying to do a lot of that quarterback run stuff, and it might be 4 yards here, 5 yards here, 6 yards that way. And like, so if you're going to have these long sustained drives, then you're not really going to run up the score. So it just depends how many possessions they're getting, obviously. But I think, generally speaking, you are going to have to score a lot because people talk about the conference being a league that air it out and move the ball through the air and rack up points. So 30 is a tough bar to set for yourself every week, but so is we have to force 5 turnovers and all this other stuff that they like to say. So I think you just aim high, right?
Right on. Well, did we miss anything, Greg? I mean, this was a pretty entertaining matchup. You know, all things considered, a $500,000 payday for the Roadrunners, a 1-game kind of agreement. I think UTSA's got to feel good about themselves coming out of this game.
Yeah, well, how did you feel about the defense overall? Because I think you were more excited about it than I was.
Well, you know, initially it's hard to. They gave up 300 yards of offense in the first half, and you're on pace for 600 yards, and it's like, oh, holy cow, this is the BYU offense that we thought it was going to be. But you know, in the second half, UTSA's offense helped out. Come back, say that again.
Right. But yards, they still had only 14 points at halftime.
Yeah.
So it was like, despite that production in terms of yards, the points weren't there.
Right.
Did you feel like it was a big difference in the second half what the defense was able to do?
I thought the way the offense was able to. I mean, they slowed the pace considerably on offense, and that helped. I mean, they shortened the game.
Yeah, I agree. And again, there was some mistakes that BYU made that helped them out, but I also thought UTSA's defense just came up with some stops when they needed it. So,
yeah, I thought it was a solid outing by the Roadrunner defense, and you know, this was a tough matchup, 2 games in a row. They're gonna have another tough matchup next week with Army. So, I mean, they're really trying to figure out, you know, what they're good at doing, and you know, let's be honest, them being out without some guys, Big Country Haynes and in the center there, Rashad Wisdom sitting out the first half, and then he'll have to sit out again in the first half again. So it's I mean, it certainly hasn't been optimal, but I think they're getting a little bit into a groove as far as production goes.
Yeah, Jalen Haynes is going to be a big loss for however long that he's out. I mean, that didn't feel like it was treated as a very serious injury right away, and we were surprised to not see him back. It sounds like he might have undergone surgery. We don't know how serious that is. Some of those can be pretty quick recoveries too, so I don't want to, you know, make too much out of that until we know for sure. But it'll be interesting to see his role, especially against a team like Army that's just going to run the ball all the time. You want to have as many guys in there as possible. And some of these other dudes that we've seen play have been like really stepping up, whether it's like Kevin Nelson or Christian Clayton or Brandon Matterson or, you know, whoever else. I'm going to forget a bunch of the names. Dantzler had a big game last week. It's like they seem like they have a lot of serviceable options in there that they can plug in, but Haynes is definitely a difference maker. So yeah, that depth is going to be tested, but I think all those guys have shown well pretty much.
Yep, I think it's the pendulum is swinging upwards toward for the Runners, Greg, and you know, even these last 2 tough losses, even with a good Army team coming in, I think they got to feel good about themselves moving forward, and you know, just trying to get to that every game conference schedule, and hopefully they're able to play everyone. And I mean, we know there's some guys banged up, and you know, Coach Traylor kind of mentioned it in post game that maybe the mentality they got to do something to kind of keep the guys' spirits up, because I mean, it's been a tough go about it these last 2 games.
Yeah, for sure. So we'll just see who gets healthy and who doesn't, but it's good to know that they don't have a conference game right away. So even if things don't go all that well next week, they really need to gear up for that final 6. I think it's going to be where it's just conference game every week and there's no bye this season. So the sooner that they can get everybody healthy for that, the better. And if that means that next week hurts a little bit as a result, that's not the end of the world.
I think so. I agree with that. Did we hit on everything?
Yeah, I think we're good.
Yeah. Another exciting road game from your UTSA Roadrunners. Appreciate you guys watching. I'm JJ Perez. That's Greg Lucas, San Antonio Express News. See you guys next week.